And so how was your meditation last week, Clive?
Yeah, it's been good. I've been, I've been doing it regularly, and I have been going over the what we learned last week, the four foundations,
Mm-hmm.
and then looking at your book a little bit. But yeah, I've got a lot to go at. I'd like to go all the way through that book, but there's 46 pages, like so.
Well, that's good.
You are the way that you read for the hot science on Tuesday. It must take you hours and hours and hours going through all that stuff that you assimilate for everybody.
Yes, well, it's about a half-time job. And so there are a couple of days of just preparation for the material and writing, creating the long newsletter and things like that. Then the day of the talk, there are a couple of hours before the talk, and it'll start with me, kind of reading the articles and highlighting stuff, and then put it down for a little bit and then pick it up again and go through it again.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I have to do. I've always worked like that. That's the way I've always been, working in fits and starts. But my problem was never getting the job done on time. My problem was getting it done thoroughly enough.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, then let us proceed with our session today, and we're going to start the first meditation. All right. Now, excuse me while I adjust my screen. And today I'm going to talk about another Buddhist topic, uh, what they call the three marks of existence. The three marks of existence are Buddhism's basic description of reality. They are three simple truths which characterize all things that exist. The first is impermanence. The Pali word is anicca. The next is suffering or dukkha. We've heard about that. And the third is non-self, anatta. And this is what these things mean. Impermanence is one of the foundational truths of Buddhism. The Buddha said that all compounded phenomena disintegrate. This means that all things are made of parts and all things fall apart. All things change. Another blunter way to put it is that everything dies. All attachment is an attempt to deny this reality. The next is suffering, dukkha, and every experience is marked by some quality of suffering or discontent, whether it's extreme pain or just a background sense of unease. As long as we hope to find lasting happiness in a world of changing things, we'll be unsatisfied. As long as we struggle to maintain a sense of solid, unchanging self, our lives will be marked by stress and fear, and our struggle will always be unsuccessful because of the next item, which is non-self. And by this, the Buddhists mean that there is no solid, separate, single, unchanging self in the world of things. All things change. This includes our body, our mind, and our idea of our own identity. We have in our minds no core, nothing firm. Our sense of identity is simply the product of multiple causes and conditions. Impermanence describes how things are. Non-self describes what they're not. I think this idea of non-self has a lot more behind it. The schools of Buddhism called Hinayana, the small vehicle, had as their highest idea of meditation the empty, quiet mind. Later schools like Zen are Mahayana, the great vehicle. I think the difference shows in the Mahayana idea something like when the mind is quiet, there is something deeper. Who knows this quiet mind? In Mahayana, you see ideas like Buddha nature and luminous mind. There's a related term, svasamvedana, a term which refers to the self-reflexive nature of consciousness, the ability of consciousness to know itself. There's been much argument between Buddhist schools about this. Buddha nature is seen by some schools of thought as something that transcends the individual, something that we all have and share. But Hinayamas might say, but when all phenomena are seen as impermanent, is not awareness also seen as impermanent? In the Mahayana Tibetan Buddhism, in the Dzogchen tradition, Svasamvedana is often called the very nature of mind and metaphorically referred to as luminosity or clear light. A common Tibetan metaphor for this reflexivity is that of a lamp in a dark room, which in the act of illuminating objects in the room also illuminates itself. And Dzogchen's Phasambhedana is seen as the primordial substratum or ground of the mind. This remains always the same, even as the mind and the world and everything else keeps changing. I studied Buddhism for 25 years, focusing on the Mahayana Chinese Chan Buddhism, which later evolved into Zen. Then, after finding a genuine self-realized teacher, turned to Advaita Vedanta. Advaita says that being and consciousness are just different names for the same thing, and that is who we are. And this being consciousness is what lights up the universe and is our real identity. This being consciousness is not limited to the individual, but is vast and limitless. It's not that the individual has being and consciousness, rather that the seeming individual exists within boundless being consciousness. A metaphor they use is a movie and the screen. We think that we're in the movie and we get scared when we see a fire and happy when we see a flower. But really, we are the screen. The movie is shown on the screen, but never touches the screen. The fire in the film does not burn the screen. The goal of Advaita Vedanta and the Tibetan Dzogchen is to realize this being consciousness as your own identity, as who you are, not the apparent individual. I think this is the highest meaning of anatta, non-self. For me, the realization of this meaning of non-self is my own highest goal. There's confusion because of the different languages of Buddhism and Vedanta. Buddhism says no self, meaning no lasting, unchanging, individual being consciousness. Vedanta says all self, meaning that everything exists within unchanging being consciousness, and this is our ultimate reality. But it's not a body, not a mind. Body and mind exist within it. It is what you are. Now for a video. Today's video is on applied Buddhist psychology, Buddha nature, and this is with Isa Gucciardi, and is worthwhile listening to. And here we go.
So this idea of Buddha nature is really revolutionary to Western psychology because many Westerners have a sense of wrongness, an innate sense of wrongness within them. And it's really a different idea to think that your innate self is actually positive and positively connected to the divine. And so this is a very important contribution that Buddhism has to helping Westerners shift their psychological orientation from a sense of wrongness. And I can tell you a story about this. I remember listening to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's main English interpreter, Geshe Thupten Jinpa, talk about the most difficult thing he had ever had to translate for His Holiness. And he said this was at an East-West psychological conference, and there was the concept of self-loathing that had come up, and he translated it literally as self-loathing into Tibetan for His Holiness, and His Holiness stopped him and said, no, you must have that wrong. And he said, no, it's self-loathing. And His Holiness was, no, that can't be right. And he said, yes, indeed, it is self-loathing. And he said, His Holiness said, but how can the self loathe the self? And this is a good question. And this is something that is occurring in the West that I'm not sure has occurred in the same way in other places. And this is one of the great maladies that we struggle with in the West. And this is why the encounter with Buddha nature through the concepts of applied Buddhist psychology is so helpful to people. So in terms of how applied Buddhist psychology can help us psychologically, we have the understanding about the nature of suffering. We have the understandings about the nature of personal responsibility. We have this potential shift in the way that we think about ourselves fundamentally, and really coming into an understanding of how do we learn how to stand in our Buddha nature. And Buddhism and applied Buddhist psychology offers us another tool in that direction, which is the compassionate holding of all phenomenon, including the compassionate holding of our own suffering. And in applied Buddhist psychology, we work with developing that sense of compassion in the same way that Buddhist practice in general does, which is through the encounter with ourselves in a meditative state. And we work developing a meditative practice where we can focus in a one-pointed way and then use that one-pointed focus to begin to explore the ways in which we are creating our own suffering and explore the roots of this self-loathing. And this is the first part of the meditative process I described is called shamatha meditation. The second process, wherein you're using that one-pointed focus that you've developed in shamatha to explore the roots of your suffering, is called vipassana meditation. And these are both processes that are part of the applied Buddhist psychology program, and they are processes that students learn how to move through in order to more deeply understand themselves. There's another form of meditation that we use in applied Buddhist psychology, which is not as typical in more generalized Buddhist practice, which is a guided meditation. And we do have a CD called the Four Immeasurables. And those guided meditations are a very good adaptation of Buddhist principles that can be used in applied Buddhist psychology practice to help people develop a different sense of themselves by engaging with equanimity, compassion, loving kindness, and joy through these guided meditations. And this is not, again, a typical way that people might work with meditation in a generalized Buddhist practice, but it is a way that we work with it in applied Buddhist psychology, where you are following a guided meditation to help attain a certain level of realization about the nature of the self. And people will often say, how will I feel different after I study Buddhist psychology? And one of the things that I say is that one of the big changes that you might feel is the necessity for developing this compassionate way of holding yourself. And when you begin to understand the consequences of your actions in a new way, you begin to take actions that are based in a compassionate way of thinking about yourself and others, and actions that develop a more compassionate view of oneself and others. And this helps people really get serious about thinking about themselves in a negative way, to think about what the consequences of that might be, and to think about the potentials of developing kindness, tolerance, patience, and bringing these practices into a shift in the way that we think about ourselves psychologically. This is very, very important. And I think that there's another experience or another concept within Buddhism called interdependence or interconnectedness. And as we develop this compassionate holding for ourselves and others, we begin to see the connections between ourselves and others in new ways. And as we feel this sense of connectivity through this compassionate holding, this helps us step out of this sense of disconnectedness that we as Westerners feel, this deep psychological sense of separateness and isolation that Buddhists in the East do not necessarily experience, and that Westerners in the West often report. And so I really think that one of the reasons that people who are Buddhist practitioners in the East don't feel this sense of isolation and this disconnectedness is because they are really working with the way in which the compassionate holding of all phenomenon helps facilitate the realization of how everything is connected. And as Westerners step out of this sense of isolation, as they step out of this place of moving away from themselves and others and into this concept of this interconnectedness, they begin to feel a support, and their psychology begins to shift a bit. So these are all the ways in which applied Buddhist psychology can help Westerners step out of a sense of self that is perhaps painful or isolated, and where they can step into a real strong sense of connection with their own goodness and their own depth of self that is nourishing and beneficial and life-changing.
With our chant, Om Shanti, 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 Om, peace, peace, peace. Now, any questions or comments today, Clarke?
I like the discussion around self-loathing.
Uh-huh.
In the West, we pay a lot of service. We pay a lot of lip service to learn to love yourself and things like that. And so self-loathing is always a bad thing, right? You know.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just another insight. It's like, I think. So what she was virtually saying is, if you follow follow Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, you don't have self-loathing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And the Buddhists talk a lot about compassion. And I think what she is saying is compassion starts at home.
yeah. You know, that's very similar to the Anglican Church, which I go to. They say you love God, love and love your neighbor as yourself.
Hmm.
So you have to love yourself first.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, it's a similar idea, and the differences are interesting to explore.
Hmm. And sometimes looking at differences helps you kind of know more about what you think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's some very fundamental changes in Buddhism. That there's certain things that you have to revise your fundamental thinking about.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And I think that is certainly part of the benefit of it, because you have to revise it in ways that uh, where you start to hold different things as true. Like the idea of impermanence.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That is, yeah. And once you've accepted it, it's hard to believe that you didn't always accept it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of people suffer a lot because of their expectation that nothing will change.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I would say people suffer a lot because of their expectations
yeah,
and wouldn't leave the rest of it. The expectation is this mental picture we build of the future, and
yeah,
having these expectations gets in the way of our being able to participate and enjoy the present moment.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that might particularly be a, a good advice for me, because I do really like looking forward to things,
Hmm.
and I understand the need to live in the moment. I have to decide whether I look forward to things too much. I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, somehow I think another part of the idea is be willing to trust yourself.
yeah, yeah. Mm.
Okay, very good. I'll see you next week then.
Yes.
Namaste.
Namaste.